Welcome everyone to this Dows Symposium event. Really thrilled all of you could make it. So we have a wonderful program lined up. Sort of all the right people are on the panels for the next 3 days, and I'm really looking forward to the program. I guess before we get started, I wanted to just remind everyone, sort of blockchains have kind of been in the news. Obviously, the space is growing quite dramatically. So far, blockchains have kind of, in my mind, have kind of four primary applications. Of course, everybody's heard of a DeFi, but blockchains are also used for managing digital assets, what are called NFTs. They're used for games, and they're used for DAOs. And in this symposium, we're actually going to focus on the DAO application of blockchains. It's possible that next year there'll be a fifth area of application for blockchains, and we'll do an event on that. But in this symposium, we're specifically going to focus on the DAO application of blockchains. There's a lot to discuss, and in fact, in the next 3 days, the sessions are going to cover sort of everything that that we can think of in the area of DAOs, things like governance, legal aspects, how to build a community, tactical questions about how to launch a DAO and how to run a DAO. So it's a really packed program, and I'm really looking forward to it. So I encourage everyone to kind of come for the all 3 days. But to get started, we wanted to make sure everybody is kind of on the same page, and everybody understands what DAOs are and what they're about, why they're exciting, what their promise is. And so to get us started, I am really thrilled to have Ariana Simpson join us. Ariana is a general partner at A16Z. Ariana has been in the blockchain space forever. So Ariana, I'm really excited to have you here. Really looking forward to the conversation. And the goal is to basically kind of introduce the audience to what DAOs are and why they're exciting and what they're capable of. But maybe before we get started, Ariana, right now you're a general partner at the A16Z crypto fund, but maybe you could just tell us a little bit about your background and your journey into the blockchain space in general.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, Dan. Really excited to be here. So I have, in fact, been in crypto forever, almost a decade at this point. I initially fell down the rabbit hole after having spent some time traveling around Africa, specifically spent time in Zimbabwe. And when I was there in early 2013, they were just starting to recover from the really bad bout of hyperinflation that they'd experienced. And so when I came back to the US, I was thinking a lot about monetary policy and what might be possible in a world in which governments couldn't hyperinflate their currencies. And so a friend of mine mentioned Bitcoin. Obviously, the space has evolved considerably from then and includes all kinds of exciting things like DAOs that weren't even really on anyone's mind back at that point in time. But it's been quite a journey, and I'm really excited to be here. And so that was sort of my first foray into the space. After that, I spent time at Facebook and BitGo, which was one of the early leaders in the security space in crypto, and then started investing full time. I started a traditional fund and then realized that there was, in fact, enough investable material to focus exclusively on the crypto space. So that was sort of the genesis of my fund, Autonomous Partners. And I've now been at A16Z for the last couple of years, leading a lot of our investments, mostly in the consumer space.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you, Ariana. That's an excellent intro. By the way, I do want to remind folks who are just joining now that there'll be time for Q&A at the very end of the Fireside Chat. So please write your questions in the Q&A, and we'll be monitoring and then discussing them when the time comes. Okay, so let's dive right in. Are you ready, Ariana?
Ready. Let's do it.
Let's do it. Let's get started. Okay, so the symposium is about DAOs. So I guess the first question to ask is, what is a DAO? Can you explain what it is? Why is it exciting?
Sure. The way I think about DAOs is as internet native global collectives that share resources, build products, and collaborate as they move towards common goals. So, I think the way we think about it is that they're really incredible at enabling bottoms up innovation and community building, where new ideas can be fostered and taken from 0 to 1. They also are, can be thought of as really a sort of new legal structure. And this is where I think some of the interesting conceptions of where we are right now in the space come to mind, in the sense that right now people think of DAOs as a category, but in reality, it's more of a framework, in the same way that LLCs or C Corps host all kinds of very different businesses. DAOs touch all kinds of different areas, and I'm sure we'll get into that more. But they really are, a new structure for organizing activity where the rules are based on code rather than bylaws and legal contracts and things like that. So that's sort of how we think about them.
Yeah, great. Actually, so I wanted to get into some examples of DAOs and kind of what they're good for, so we can look at some specific applications. But maybe before we do that, let's just talk a little bit about how DAOs actually operate, just again, to make sure everybody's on the same page. Maybe it's worthwhile saying that DAO, the acronym DAO, stands for Decentralized Autonomous Organizations. So I guess they're not quite autonomous because they really are driven by humans and human votes.
Still people involved, yes.
Still people involved, but we still call them DAOs because that's kind of a cool name. Maybe we should be called decentralized organizations, DAOs. Regardless, let's see. So maybe just we can explain before we go over a couple of specific DAOs, just to give examples of what they're for. Maybe we could just explain how they operate, in the sense that I guess DAOs are sort of a partnership, right? Technically, they're kind of an unincorporated partnership where a bunch of people get together and they share a vision and they can make decisions. Can you just maybe briefly walk us through the steps of what does it take to create a DAO, and how do participants actually participate in the DAO?
Sure, and I'll caveat everything by saying that all DAOs are different. And so not all DAOs are one size fits all. So definitely nuances in different kinds. But generally speaking, what we're talking about is a group of people who have come together to achieve some sort of shared goal, whether, buying a piece of NFT art or putting together a play and earn guild, or, some sort of shared purpose, whatever that might be. And they generally have a shared wallet. So the financial component is important because that's what I think often enables the actual activity to be financed and actually executed on. And there generally tends to also be a native token. And the token piece is very important because that's what actually allows the members of the community to vote on what they should be doing, and perform a number of kind of other activities that are necessary for deciding what the DAO is going to do, and sort of managing operations.
Yeah, perfect. Actually, that's the perfect answer. So really, the DAO kind of launches. It's just a program on the blockchain. People can join the DAO, and then maybe there's like a treasury that the DAO manages,
right?
And then the members can sort of vote on what the DAO should do.
Yeah,
the DAO can employ. It's kind of amazing. The DAO can employ people and pay their salaries. It could decide to invest its treasury in certain things, and all that's done by voting. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think one thing that we find especially exciting about DAOs is the fact that they really bring down the barrier to entry to forming a collective. So I think many of the DAOs that we've seen sprout up, which are now large operations with many, many participants operating on a fairly large scale, started out as, a couple people who were like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if we did X? And they probably wouldn't have had the momentum at that point in time to actually form a corporation and do that, because many of these things started out feeling like a bit of a hobby or something like that. And so it's really exciting to see more people being able to jumpstart new projects, because it's very simple to set up a DAO, at least initially. And so it's really, I think, been a boon to innovation and exciting creation, in a way that, I think wouldn't necessarily have happened if we were still only considering traditional structures.
Yeah, that makes sense. Great. So let's look at some of the example applications for DAOs. In particular, let's talk about some specific DAOs. So what are your favorite DAOs?
Well, let's see. There's obviously a number in our portfolio, so we're very excited about many of those. I think one that has really risen to prominence in the digital art space is Pleaser DAO, which started off as kind of a collective of DeFi leaders, and they had initially come together to buy a piece of art made by People Pleaser, hence the name, which was the Uniswap video, and since expanded into acquiring a number of other culturally significant pieces of art. They also tokenized the Doge piece and had a very successful launch with that. So I think they've really been at kind of the forefront of saying, what are culturally significant artistic artifacts that we want to own as a community? And it's really exciting to see because many of these are, obviously quite expensive. And so they would have maybe gone into the hands of one individual collector and not really been available for the community to enjoy or, own in. But now, we're starting to see that model kind of flipped on its head. And so I think they've really done an incredible job of kind of pushing forward the idea of community ownership of this kind of asset.
So Pleaser DAO is a wonderful example, right? That's an example of a collector DAO that basically members contribute funds to the collective DAO, and then they vote on which pieces of art they want to buy, right?
That's right.
And actually, it's kind of amazing. You can look at Pleaser DAO. You can look at the Pleaser DAO OpenSea account or OpenSea page or even their own page, and you can see all the art pieces that they own.
Yep.
It's actually quite a collection at this point.
Oh yeah, really, really cool. Yeah. And then I think, they're also pushing the boundaries of what's been done before in terms of some of the financial components, meaning the fractionalization and selling off pieces of it, all of which is I think the kind of thing that has been much discussed also in the traditional art world, but hasn't necessarily been done at a meaningful scale. And I think the Web3 elements were critical missing pieces in order to actually do this successfully, because there have been some kind of Web2 companies that have tried to do this and with some success here and there, but I don't think, it's reached the sort of scale that will be possible using kind of Web3 components like tokens.
Yeah, and part of it is because this is kind of a global reach, right? Anyone with an internet connection could in principle join the Pleaser DAO if they want to. And then collectively, they can decide what art they want to invest in and what they want to collect.
Yeah, exactly. I think, another important piece of DAOs generally is the fact that we really view them as sort of internet native corporations that bring down the barriers to entry for people who may not live anywhere near each other, who may not have that much in common except a given interest in a certain thing, in this case, digital art. And so, yeah, it's been really exciting to see kind of them innovating in that particular category.
Okay, great. So that's a collector DAO. That's kind of one application for DAOs.
Yep.
What are other great applications that have emerged?
Sure. Another one that comes to mind that is very social in nature is Friends with Benefits. And so that, also started out as kind of a collective of creatives, but with a slightly different take, meaning more of a community of people excited about art and culture. And, membership is gated by a token, which is an important kind of part of the ethos of the community, meaning there's, some barrier to entry to come in, but after that, people have, this group of people who are aligned in terms of interests, and then, are able to share in things like an NFT gallery, an editorial venture, and a number of other sort of benefits that come with membership. And the way they organize things was sort of by seasons. So each season would have a particular area of focus. And that was sort of the guiding principle for that particular period of time. And yeah, it started out, I think, as sort of like a token gated Soho House concept. And then I think has really expanded to be a lot more than that, just sort of creating an environment and sort of a community for creatives to really express themselves, to get feedback from other people, and to work on creative projects together.
Yeah, right. So that's an example of a very successful social DAO. I think there's there's several thousand members now of this DAO, right? And they run events and people can join the events and so on.
Yep, exactly. They also have a native token.
Yeah, which is and the native token is something that is used for voting and participating in events and so on. That's
right. Yes. So there's a minimum threshold of ownership to become a member of the DAO. And then the governance token is used to vote on proposals and things like that, and kind of manage the community.
Yeah, that's great. So we're walking through down our list, right? So we talked about collector DAOs, we talked about social DAOs, What else do we see in the DAO space?
Well, another one kind of in a different direction, more in the gaming universe, is Breeder DAO. So Breeder DAO was really conceived as sort of a byproduct of the play and earn movement. And so their mission is high quality NFT production, specific to certain game universes that they're excited about. And yeah, so the DAO is organized about that. They have partners who will then use those assets, like scholarship guilds and things like that, who sort of plug in. And so, they're really focused on generating NFTs and in-game assets in a kind of scalable way, and then distributing those to guild members and other communities who are interested in using them for kind of their metaverse or in-game purposes.
Yeah, actually, I want to walk through quickly through a couple more examples. So there are DAOs that are like charity DAOs that mostly do charity. I think a nice example of that is Gitcoin, which actually has a lot of support of the open source community.
Yeah.
What's amazing there is people contribute to Gitcoin, and then open source developers can submit proposals. Like, I want to develop this particular piece of software.
Right.
Members of the Gitcoin DAO basically vote: do they want to support that proposal or not? And actually, funds get allocated to the open source developer to go ahead and develop the software they proposed. So it's really it's kind of interesting. It's charity, but it's charity towards open source goods, which is really kind of a remarkable application.
Yeah, I think the public goods funding for open source is really important. And yeah, I think I would really consider it very valuable core infrastructure. Many amazing projects have gone through the Gitcoin process. And I think it's really important to create tools, especially in the Web3 ethos, which I think is very focused on open source and sort of general availability of things to plug in. And obviously we believe very much in kind of the composability theory. And so having all of these open source tools of various kinds and the ability to plug into different protocols is super important. Yeah, I agree. I think they've done some really exciting work in that department.
Yeah, and we see that kind of model emerging in other fields. Like, there are medical DAOs emerging now that the community can support, various clinical trials and so on. So it's really quite remarkable how broad even the idea of a charity DAO has gone. The last one I want to talk about is like the very large ones, which are the protocol DAOs. So DAOs that kind of manage Compound, DAOs that manage Aave, DAOs that manage Uniswap. So these are DAOs that actually manage a fairly large amount of funding, and they're very large. Just for example, the Uniswap DAO, it's got almost 30,000 members that vote on proposals that govern Uniswap. So what do you think of that aspect? That actual protocols are being managed and governed by these DAOs?
At a high level, I think it's great. The ability to have more transparent decision making, get the involvement of a broader base of stakeholders. These are all things that we think are very positive. The challenge, I think, is often in the implementation, because there's, I think, a fine balance to be struck, and many of the DAOs in that sort of segment are still, I think, experimenting and figuring this out. Between what degree of decision making should be open to the general public, and I think that's a difficult balance to strike, because on the one hand you want to have the ability to, like I said, get community buy-in and involve different stakeholders and all of that, but the flip side of that is that it can also become a bit of a burden, especially in terms of operating quickly and innovating, if you have to get too much buy-in from too many people. And so I think that is an area that is still being figured out. The good news is that the quality and intelligence and enthusiasm of these communities is really high. And so we're continuing to see massive amounts of progress made on figuring out some of these concepts. But it is really fascinating to witness and realize, oh, wow, this problem has never come up before. Okay, how do we get, for example, different vendors to propose solutions that would help the protocol? How do we then have a vote on which solution the community would like to, use. Things like that are real problems that have come up for the first time in the last couple of months, or last couple of months for some of these protocols. And so, it's just a matter of sort of working through some of the problems from the ground up and saying, okay, this is how we're going to solve them moving forward. But yeah, it's a very exciting design space because many of these issues are, like I said, emerging for the first time just now.
Not to mention that many of there have been examples of governance systems coming under attack where bad proposals are being proposed and voted on, and all of a sudden funds are lost. And by the way, we're going to have entire panels just devoted in these 3 days, just devoted to how to run governance for a DAO, how to secure a DAO, how to deal with all these hacks that are happening, what the implications are, what the long-term, how we're going to resolve these hacks in the long term. So this is going to be like a big chunk of what we discuss in the next 3 days. So I hope this kind of gives folks here kind of a sense of what DAOs are for, right? There are investment DAOs, collector DAOs, charity DAOs, protocol DAOs, social DAOs, many different application areas for these DAOs. I guess I want to kind of get to the question that probably everybody has on their mind, which is you, Ariana, as an investor in the space, how do you decide which DAOs to invest in? Like, what are you looking for?
We're definitely always focused on the team. I think how we think about team is a little bit different in the construct of DAOs versus in a more traditional company context, because like I said, one of the benefits is the fact that you are able to lower the barrier to entry and therefore have more creativity and more genesis of different exciting projects. The flip side of that is, we want to make sure that the entrepreneurs that we're backing are really committed to whatever it is that they're building, because building anything, be it a new protocol or a new technology or a new community, often takes many years of very dedicated and focused work. And therefore, there's, in the DAO community where many of these start out as sometimes hobby projects, they then evolve into much more, but in many cases, they do start out in that context. We want to make sure that the folks that we're backing are creative and innovative, but also, actually going to see this out. And really build kind of the community for the long term. I think early on, the vision of the founders is perhaps even more important in the context of a DAO than it is in a company, because often in the early days of DAOs, people are not being paid. And so you really need founding members who are able to inspire others and get them excited about the vision, not just because they're offering a paid job, but really because there's a broader mission and a very exciting kind of community ethos. And so I think that's something that we definitely look for in our, in our DAO founders. That said, there's really no sort of typical founder profile in Web3 because the space is so new. Nobody has decades of experience because all of it's kind of happening as we go. So, what that founder actually looks like, I think makes a huge difference in one case to the next. Another example of a DAO that we were excited to partner with was Yield Guild Games. And the founder, Gabby Dizon, was, I think, a really dedicated games entrepreneur for 18 years prior to founding Yield Guild Games. And so his kind of vision in the space, his network, the relationships he had, the depth to which he had thought about things, I think really stood out to us. And I think YGG is a really exciting example of the sort of geographic diversity that we're also seeing. They're based in the Philippines, and really emerged during the pandemic as a result of, his desire to help people who had been laid off due to the lockdowns and the pandemic. And therefore he started loaning out his NFT assets to people who would then play Axie Infinity and earn tokens as a result. So, I think that's just another example of a founder who had been very deep in a category while he hadn't been working on YGG for that entire time. He had obviously really thought profoundly about what was possible in that universe. And so, that's one example of a kind of founder that we'd be excited to back.
Yeah, actually, so generalizing this just a little bit, if somebody wanted to create a DAO, like at what point should they come talk to someone like you? Is it like at the day after they had the epiphany, oh my God, we should have a DAO for this and that? Is it after they've actually already launched and started building a community, or is it after they've already raised a whole bunch of funds and now they're looking to get to the next step? At which point should they come talk to you?
Definitely not after they raised a bunch of funds. I think we like to get to know founders as early as possible as a general rule, because we don't necessarily always invest on the first meeting. We really like to get to know people over a longer period of time. And so having the ability to kind of understand their thinking and also evaluate their execution. Did they actually do what they said they were going to do? Do they have a demonstrated ability to bring things to bear? I think is very important. So early on, I think is definitely the right time to come meet us. We love kind of hearing people's ideas, even if everything is not fully formed. But yeah, I think that the important thing is we want people to feel excited about continuing to work on this and making sure that they're kind of actually committed to building the community. As long as that's there, I think we're excited to meet at any point.
Okay, so that's great advice for an individual who wants to launch a DAO. What about an organization? So what if an organization that's currently centralized is thinking, oh my God, there's this DAO thing happening. Maybe our organization should become a DAO instead of being centralized. Do you have any advice for organizations who are thinking of becoming DAOs?
Yeah, that's a really fascinating sort of design space. I think it's interesting because in many cases, I do think over time, more and more existing centralized companies will move in the direction of becoming DAOs, because they may see kind of the benefits from a community engagement perspective, especially of having people really bought in and feeling a sense of ownership over whatever it is that they do. We haven't really seen much of that happen yet, but I think there's a lot of people thinking about it. So, I think you have to have an organization that is fairly brave in the sense that this is definitely a new frontier and therefore willing to kind of push the boundary and experiment. So once you have sort of that degree of buy-in from key stakeholders, I think that's sort of the first initial step. But all of this is super exciting, and we're always happy to brainstorm with folks. So if anyone is thinking about making their trad company into a DAO, we're certainly happy to chat about it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So I guess the next question that's kind of probably on everybody's minds is, so we kind of understand now what DAOs are about, what they're for, how they're used. Do you think this is something that's actually ready for the general public to use? So do you think this is the tools are there, what is this is this something that already can be used by kind of the general population, not just folks who can code and folks who understand blockchains inside out?
I think we're getting there. It can definitely already be accessible to people who aren't technical and haven't been in the space for a very long time. I know many DAO members who are relatively new to crypto, but bring other kinds of value add to their communities. And we actually think it's really important to have kind of a diverse group of people with different skill sets and different backgrounds kind of contributing. So, in that regard, yes. I will say there are certainly still, sort of more practical challenges that come up. Wallets are not necessarily always super easy to use. Understanding the ins and outs of how governance works is also non-trivial. So there definitely are sort of barriers to be overcome. There are a lot of people building tooling for DAOs. I think there's a lot of companies who are working on figuring out how to tackle some of the different issues that are coming up for DAOs, be it how do you pay people in 17 different countries, probably using crypto, but even that, might be very manually intensive if you're having to send individual transactions to each contributor. So how do you handle that? What's, Gusto for this universe, or what's Carta for this universe? So tooling in that regard, I think, is definitely something that's being worked on. The DAO universe for now is still relatively small, certainly if you compare it to the universe of LLCs or corporations or whatever. But we expect that to definitely change over the next few years. So I think it will certainly be an area with a lot of opportunity for folks who want to build.
And actually, that's great you brought that up, because actually our next panel is exactly on how to build a DAO and what are the tools that are being developed. So that's exactly a great way to tee up our next panel. Perfect. There's actually a question in the chat that I have to ask you. Okay. So you were saying that that DAOs are many centralized organizations might be thinking of becoming DAOs because maybe that's how things are going to go. So the obvious question is the A16Z fund ever going to become a DAO?
That's a really interesting question. I will say we've been thinking about it. From a regulatory perspective, given how we're structured, I think that might not be on our immediate roadmap. But the way we think about building our team and our organization is that we really want to be involved with the protocols that we're using and involved with the tools that are being built. So it's certainly under consideration, but I wouldn't expect any short-term activity from us on that front.
Yeah, I guess there's regulatory issues. Actually, generally, I guess if I ask you what are the challenges that are facing the DAO community, would you say that the regulatory clarity is one of those?
Yes, I would. I think, it would be great to get a little bit more clear directives on exactly how this ecosystem will be thought of. Obviously, we believe that all DAOs are not the same. And so, a financial community shouldn't be thought of in the same context as an artistic community or a social community. And so we really, have been working with a lot of the agencies, from the SEC to the CFTC to, all of the regulatory bodies in question to kind of help think through what common sense, reasonable, and also practical rules of the road should be in the context of DAOs and frankly, in the context of Web3 more broadly. So it's definitely something we're thinking about. Our main focus is making sure that the innovation that we're seeing in the category is not stifled and that, folks can really build the exciting future that we see in Web3. And so obviously having regulatory clarity is an important component to that.
Yeah, great. This is actually our time to transition into the Q&As, and there are actually a couple of questions in the Q&A that I wanted to ask you. Sure. So first, multiple people are actually asking, how do they get in touch with you if they want to, propose it out to you? Multiple questions in the Q&A.
Well, I'm very available on Twitter, so feel free to find me there. I'm at Ariana Simpson. Just tag me and shoot me a message, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, great. And then there's another question about actually when you invest in a DAO, like what is it that you're investing in? So the question is actually worded nicely. It says basically when the DAOs launch, there's no legal structure behind them. So what does it mean for something without a legal structure to raise funds? And when you're investing in them, what are you actually investing in if there's no legal structure behind these DAOs? So I think maybe this would be good to clarify.
Sure. So generally we are buying tokens. So as I mentioned, the DAOs will generally have a native governance token. And so we are basically buying a percentage of the token supply. So that's the structure.
But in terms of, but I think it is useful to say like these DAOs, they don't have a legal structure, but this is like code that's running on the blockchain. So
that's right. Yeah. Yep. So they will have, they'll have a wallet that is where they have their treasury, and then they'll have the governance tokens. So, we might invest in the form of USDC or something like that, and then receive native tokens in return.
Yeah. And, I guess the question was like, there's sort of no regulatory framework. Like what if the DAO owner just decides to take all the funds to itself, right? How do you make sure that you're investing in DAOs that aren't going to do that, or can that actually happen?
That could technically also happen with a company. So fortunately, it's not a problem that we've run into. I think we've been able to back really dedicated, amazing founders. And so it's not an issue that we've run into. Yeah, quite frankly, there are certain risks that come with investing in DAOs. It's certainly the frontier of kind of investing in Web3. But we also think because of that, there's an outsized opportunity to really back kind of the future of how Web3 communities will be organized. And so, we're happy to take on some of that risk in exchange for kind of the opportunity that we see.
Yeah, and I think it also is useful to say that again, these are programs that run on the blockchain, and so there has to be a community that votes for certain things to happen, right?
That's right.
It can't be that just one person says, "Oh, I'm just going to take all the DAO treasury and walk away."
Yes, there's generally multi-sigs with multiple parties who kind of vote, as you said, on these key decisions and things like that.
Yeah. Now, of course, problems have occurred in the past, and like I said, we're going to be talking about those during the symposium. So there's actually lots of discussion around that topic coming. But by and large, these are organizations that are run by programs that run on the chain, and you can kind of verify that the programs sort of do what they're supposed to be doing.
That's right.
Let's see. There's another question about maximum ownership. Is there like, is there like a maximum amount that an investor can hold, that any one entity can hold in a DAO, or is it unlimited, or is it something that you self-regulate? Like you try to make sure that you don't own too much of a DAO when you're investing in it?
Yeah, we think it's really important to have, a very broad set of stakeholders in a DAO. We could start a DAO by ourselves and hold all of our tokens, and it wouldn't be very exciting for anybody, because at that point, kind of what's the point? So, we find that, it sort of regulates itself in the sense that, we're mindful of that. The founders are mindful of that. And, another thing that we do in order to make sure that we're kind of good citizens of these communities is we have a very extensive delegation program where we actually give our tokens, like basically lend our tokens to different kinds of groups. Some of them are university blockchain clubs, some of them are nonprofits, different kinds of stakeholders who can then vote on whatever they think should happen in these various communities. And in many cases, they don't vote the same way that we vote. We also participate, but they're free to make their own decisions. And we think that's very important to make sure that you have kind of a broad base of people who have different opinions and can bring different kinds of value to the table. And so that's another way in which we make sure that we don't have an outsized impact on these communities, and instead can have different stakeholders voice their various opinions.
Yeah, and actually, it's interesting when you delegate. Those delegates can actually vote independently. They're not beholden to you in any way. They can make up their minds. Yeah.
Many times they vote in a different way than we do, and that's all in the public record. And we think that's great. We don't want our voice to be heard over others. I think it's very important to have different kinds of folks participating, and so we just want to make sure that folks are active in the community, paying close attention to what's going on. As long as that's happening and they're operating in good faith, we're very excited for a different set of opinions.
So we're actually coming close to time, but there are really two questions that I really have to ask you. So maybe we can do those in quick succession. So one is actually a good question in the chat, which is, so basically the question is, what does the return on investment look like when you're investing in a DAO? How do you expect, like you're at the end of the day, you are venture capitalist. How do you expect to make a profit from investing in a DAO?
Well, I can't comment on any specific returns, unfortunately, for compliance reasons. But in general, we hope that as these communities grow, and they have a native token, the idea is as the community becomes more valuable and larger, presumably the tokens would appreciate in value over time.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. And so my last question actually is for me, which I'm personally very curious to hear your answer to this, and I'm sure many in the audience will be too. So these days, whenever I sit at a coffee shop in Palo Alto, I'm at Stanford, so whenever I sit at a coffee shop in Palo Alto, literally it takes 5 minutes until someone in a table somewhere in the coffee shop starts talking about crypto and blockchains. That's like the level of engagement and I'd say excitement about the space is something that I haven't seen in quite a while.
Yeah.
How long do you think this is going to last? Is this like going to be with us for the next 5 years, 10 years, 100 years?
Well, I think we're still really getting into the most exciting innings. And obviously I'm biased because I spend all my time thinking about this, but there's also a reason why I spend all my time thinking about this. If I didn't think there was a massive opportunity here and some of the most interesting, engaged, creative entrepreneurs building in this category, I would frankly go do something else. But I think, now is the part where it gets really exciting because Web3 has crossed into mainstream consciousness. NFTs were a really pivotal moment because that, I think, was the first movement, even more so than DeFi, that really clicked for a lot of people who hadn't previously been in crypto. All of a sudden, you didn't have to be technical. You didn't have to be an engineer. You could just understand, I think, viscerally, this concept of owning something that is unique and specific to you, that you have control over, and that in many cases also confers you other rights. And I think that message and that concept really resonated with a lot of people who were, had previously not really felt engaged in the crypto community. And so now that we're kind of hitting that point where a lot of different folks, not just technical ones, are really starting to feel like crypto is their own, that I think is where it gets really interesting. And you're seeing that in, the diversity of types of DAOs. Like there's really just a sort of creative experience and movement of people building exciting new things. So, I think these waves of technology innovation sort of ebb and flow. They're not like consistently up and to the right. But I think over time, we're going to continue to see people take the components that were built previously and innovate on the model, and then just kind of keep iterating from there. So I'm very bullish on a multi-decade horizon for sure.
Yeah, it's only at the beginning, I guess. Fantastic. This is a wonderful way to end this fireside chat. So Ariana, thank you so much for coming and spending time with us and explaining DAOs to the public. I hope everybody's kind of on the same page now in terms of what DAOs are, and now we'll basically switch to the next panel. I guess we have a little bit of a break, but the next panel is going to be on basically what is it that you need to do if you want to build a DAO and run it yourself. Yeah. So thank you so much, Ariana. This has been fantastic.
Thank you, Dan. Thanks so much.